everybody, and welcome to the August 28th Trips and Traps. Andy Serling, joined with Richard Migliori.
And we got a lot of great races to talk about, some real action. It's unfortunate the summer's coming to a close. We got a nice breeze, and I'm glad you got the tan suit memo.
Yeah, well, we did want it. We usually don't call each other in the morning. This morning, we definitely didn't call each other. Anyhow, I thought we had a great assortment of races here, and we're going to start out with something we don't do that often on the show, which is to show you a race on a wet track, because I thought, and I know you agree, the performance of the third-place finisher, while not hidden gap year, is a very interesting one to talk about a very good first-time starter that finishes third.
Yeah, and right away, he gets off a bit poorly, which a lot of first-time starters don't break great. But what impresses me, Andy, is down the backstretch, he's going to start climbing because of the kickback. The mud's coming back in his face, and it's a great illustration for people who need to know what climbing is. When you see this horse start to his action's going to start going up and down, his head's going to come up in the air. But then after about 100 yards of it, he figures it out and settles.
Right, and this is what we're talking about. She, by the way. That's
sorry.
Usually my mistake. You're stealing my lines here. She does. You'll see it happen here, and she's also clearly not handling it early, yet somewhere in the middle of the race, she figures it out, and she starts handling the track.
Yeah, right in here. She just now kind of dropped her head, took a hold of the bridle. Her rider, Joel Rosario, goes from kind of scrubbing on it to like, oh, okay, now I've got horse. And she starts picking horses up very readily.
No, she really made a big run in here. And you think about the leader of this race, really collapses in the last few strides. The winner gets an absolutely perfect trip. That's that horse down there. Maybe carries her in the race. And gap year, I don't think that we're, covering any brilliant ground, but this is a horse that it feels like with some experience, she could be A-OK, Richie.
Yeah, especially when we're going to watch after the race, her gallop out strong. And I know you and I agree, she hung a little bit in the stretch, because right here it looks like she's going to pick them up. And if she doesn't get to the horse on the lead, she's definitely going to pass the second place.
That horse.
But that horse winds up winning, and I kind of almost feel like gap year kind of spurred her on. But I think sometimes you get these young horses, they're not used to going fast outside. In the morning, because of traffic, you got horses galloping. They gallop towards the middle of the track. The horses that are working fast go to the rail. Now, here's the gallop out.
There's the gallop out. We actually didn't see the gallop out in this show, but regardless of that, she gallops out past horses, past the wire, and she went well in front of them. And I think it's important to note that she did that. We're looking at the winner on the backstretch. This is not really relevant stuff. Regardless of that, she gallops out past them. What you're saying is she wasn't really, it was sort of a new environment for her in the stretch, I think what you're trying to say.
Yeah, because she's out towards the middle. In the mornings, they're down towards the rail when they work fast, and I think she just got a little bit lost. I think if she had something outside of her, it would have kept her running, much like she kind of carried the horse inside of her.
And I think this is a very good example of why these races at Saratoga especially, and even sometimes in wet tracks, are great learning experience. They're learning experience for the horses, but I think they're learning experience for horse players as well, because you can see these things and they will repeat themselves in other situations. And maybe they're horses that finish fifth or so in the races, but you can see them do a little bit of running at different times. When we get back to Belmont Park and they have that experience, these are the kind of races, listen, you're not going to make a fortune with gap year. She's probably going to be a short price, and hopefully she runs back to it and she turns out to be a good horse. But she will find horses occasionally that are in the middle of the pack that do some of that running, and those are the ones that pay $20 and $30 in their second starts.
Well, I just thought it was a great illustration of what you can apply going forward. And I also thought it was interesting. I mean, they were separated by a nose and a head, the first three finishers, and it was 8 lengths back to the fourth place finisher. So all three of these horses might be okay. Skipaloot, obviously, she's a sprinter.
No, I agree, right, because she got a little bit leg weary late, and it's been a tough meeting for Eddie Keneally, and I'm sure this was as frustrating a loss as any of them. We're going to turn our attention to a turf race on Travers Day, and this is one I like showing these races and talking to Richie and trying to figure out, what could you have maybe done here? But there's a horse in here, Royal Blessing, who I think is better suited to going these mile and a 16th distances than the longer distances, even though he won one at Aqueduct. And in this case, he got in the worst possible spot. He's caught chasing 4 wide around the racetrack in a paceless race where the horses that run 1, 2, 3 basically spent the entire race on the rail.
Yeah, and listen, maybe this horse wasn't going to run great. Maybe he wasn't going to win, I should say. But you have no chance to win when you have this kind of trip. You cannot be wide both turns and basically in no man's land the entire time.
And you see what happened there. The horse was in a somewhat contending position, the second pack, but being caught 4 wide gets taken all the way back to last. And that's why you see the opposite sometimes, where a rider doesn't break that well and he gets down to the inside, he saves ground and cuts that corner, and how it brings you into the race. The opposite happens here. It completely takes you out of the race.
Yeah, and it just feels like Luis Saez didn't make a decision. You have to make a decision. And me personally, I think I would have been a little more aggressive and looked for that break, find that gap somewhere, because he really didn't have the opportunity to take back to tuck in. So now you've got to make a decision. Go forward and find the spot.
Right, and maybe create a little bit of separation by doing so. I mean, it's hung out here the entire way, and this is not a horse. I mean, ultimately ends up getting beaten about 12 lengths. But you know what? He's actually running by some horses in the stretch, and he still has horse, despite the fact that he's covered a ton more ground than anybody else, in a race where he's chasing a pace. I mean, he's making a move right here. He actually moves into fourth on the outside. This is a horse that had run in the race, but because of the trip, Richie, he was just denied any possible chance.
Yeah, and right here you're going to see he hits him right-handed. He leans in twice. It just feels like he didn't go in with some sort of a comprehensive plan and maybe a second plan, plan B.
And also, these are much trickier races to ride. It's something I wanted to talk to you about as well. You ride at Belmont Park, you ride around one turn. The ground loss doesn't seem to be as important if you're wide, but also you go down a straightaway in the back. It's not that big a deal. You come to Saratoga, it is a completely different animal riding these turf courses in route races.
Yeah, you have to know what you're going to do because you have a very short run to the turn. Where at Belmont, like you said, you come out of a little dog leg. It's not ideal to be wide there, but then you have about 3/8 of a mile to sort it out and find a place to drop in. Here, you better get in there quick and figure out what you're going to do early. And then if you're caught wide the first turn, you have to save ground the second turn.
Yeah, and also I think this is a good example of a race, and you can find this in other races. We're not going to show every race where this may have happened. When you get to Belmont Park, these horses can get very, very different trips, both the horses that were successful and the horses that weren't, and it can get some radically different results downstate.
I'm still surprised when I see a half go up in 49-1 and a horse like Shining Copper, who's not a bad horse, first time off the claim, just galloping on the lead. How do you expect to beat him?
You can't beat him. And I think that obviously is another discussion of understanding that you got to get your horse into the race to give him a chance. You see it sometimes, you don't see other ones. The next race we show, which was 2 races later, the Kennel 1 King's Bishop, another race where I think all the riders allowed a very talented horse in Fast Anna to dictate the race. And a couple of closers that ran 3rd and 4th ran much better than I think some people might realize in first viewing.
Yeah, they ran terrific races. And actually, you pointed out the 4th place finish to me, Noble Moon. I hadn't really paid that much attention to him, so I went back last night and watched the race again. But Coup de Grace, he got a funny trip as far as I'm concerned from the outside post, which is, like I think you said it, high-priced real estate, right? From that outside going 7/8, kind of put himself in a position where it was just not comfortable.
And you have to sense that they're going slower because Coup de Grace is a horse that could take himself out of race if they're going fast. He wasn't that far out of it, so you have to realize the tempo of the race and what's going to happen in these spots, and Noble Moon is inside of him. Noble Moon ran very well, is they're going to get bunched like that. So why would you have wanted to be in a position where you're going to get caught inside of horses, and particularly inside of the eventual winner, the Big Beast?
Yeah, and the Big Beast is traveling so well here. Now, I know Wildcat Red does drift out, and it's kind of an inviting spot, but when you've got a live horse outside of that horse, you know he's going to herd him back over. So if you can't get there real fast, you would have been better off waiting and following the Big Beast and then coming out or making a decision later.
Yeah, and I didn't like Coup de Grace in here, but I'm telling you, and with all due respect to Big Beast, I'm not sure that he didn't run as well as anybody in here. And I'll tell you something, if there had been more separation in this race and gotten a clean trip, I think Coup de Grace may well have won this race. And Noble Moon, bar shoe on, hadn't run since the Wood, or had even run before the Wood. To come back in a race like this and run as well as he did, I think it bodes very well for his future.
I almost would venture to say this is the best race he ever ran.
I agree.
I think it was a big step forward for him. Coup de Grace, you could see, it almost looks like he's lugging in. He's got his head turned a bit. I think it was more that he was just uncomfortable when he's looking at those horses outside of him. I think if he had gotten a different trip, he definitely could have won the race. And do you think that Fast Anna got that kind of easy lead because maybe they just didn't respect him enough off his 2 races?
I think that's very possibly true. They said cheap speed, might be a runoff or something, but a couple of things happened here. CZ, obviously, you're not going to do what you did last time. You're not going to get embroiled in a speed duel. He had some trouble in the stretch. Wildcat Red did not break sharply, and he just doesn't have that kind of speed coming out of the route races in here. And the Big Beast, the connections rightfully said, we can stalk this horse and beat him. Now, as it turned out, it was pretty close, and they could have looked like goats if they didn't get it done. And all those things conspired against the closers in here, and I just think that Coup de Grace was against it, and there wasn't any rider error in that. There's nothing you can do about it. You're a deep
that's
closer.
just a pace dynamic.
But maybe that horse needed to be out free running in the clear.
Yeah, you would like to have seen maybe if she had been able to give herself two options instead of locking into one idea.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see his horses go forward because I think a lot is being made where everybody's saying, "Oh, the Big Beast is great." Now, listen, the Big Beast is very good. There's no denying that he's maybe one of the best three-year-old sprinters in the country.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think a lot took place in this race besides the first two finishers, and you have to watch the whole race. And Noble Moon, Leader Jemai's done a good job with him, and I think he's a horse going forward. If she can get him sound, and it's not an easy thing to do,
sure.
if you can do that going forward, he's going to do some damage in some races, maybe at a price.
Yeah, I agree.
We will move on to Sunday, I believe, and look at the last race. And this is a race where there's some significant trouble for Bold Senator, but also there are horses that were a little overly aggressively ridden. Dreamboat in particular, lots of heat. I thought used up too much energy chasing. They're the 8 and 12. They ran 3rd and 4th. But Bold Senator, boy, was he unlucky in this race.
But he just gets completely shuffled back out of the race.
Yeah, he's down on the inside in the blue. The 8 is right here in the purple, and the 12, Dreamboat, is going to rush up and chase the leaders hard wide the whole way. Ran very well. But Bold Senator, man, he was unlucky.
Yeah, and listen, if you want to come from behind and ease a horse back, that's one thing, but you never want to get basically forced backwards like that out of the race. It just takes your horse out of his rhythm. But I agree with you. There was some aggressive moves in the middle of the race here that I thought compromised horses.
Yeah, I mean, you got to know they're going fast up there. I mean, sometimes you got to know they're going slow. And listen, I know it's not easy, and Richie's obviously been in these spots, and you don't always make the right choice. But here, it just felt to me like the 8 horse who my page just blew away. I mean, Javier's even asking him a little bit here to keep up. What was his major concern that he felt he needed to keep up with lots of heat? There's 3 running away in front of him.
Yeah, I don't know. And I can almost cut Paul Rodriguez a bit of a break on Dreamboat because he doesn't get to ride the grass much. He rides at Finger Lakes. They don't have a turf course, and he's probably less understanding of how to ride the turf and the pace dynamic. But, you know, Javier, obviously, listen, he's been riding lights out, so I'm not going to try to be too critical on him. But, you know, you've got those 3 battling. I think let them come back to you more than you trying to get after your horse to get to them.
Yeah, and keep in mind, the horses that run 1-2 in here, one of them's just reached the picture and back. The winner isn't even in the picture at all. They get the best of trips. Now, as we come in the stretch, you're going to see Bold Senator, who's in blue down to the inside. If we can stop it, you see the white shadow roll. I'm trying to do a great job. It's a white shadow roll. On the outside are Dreamboat and the 8, the sheet, lots of heat. Lots of heat just hangs a little bit, I think because she was used too much early in here. I thought that the 12 Dreamboat ran very well. The 1 gets stopped again.
Yeah, the 1 gets stopped again. He had trouble the entire trip. Even here, it's never like a comfortable space. He's kind of got to shave a horse to getting out of the rail. And I thought, you know, honestly, the second place finisher, Dylan Davis, has been riding terrific, and I thought he's given some really good rides on the turf.
Yeah, I was really glad that Dylan got a win last week. I think he's got 3 wins now, 2 or 3 wins, and he's a good rider, this kid. Let's just show you what happens to poor Bold Senator a little bit at the start.
But he really gets compromised and basically gets put into the fence, and you know, it shows you how athletic a horse is to get himself out of trouble when you watch what he's got to do to keep from hitting the fence entirely.
Yeah, I mean, dropping back in the race didn't hurt him, but this poor guy, I mean, Luis Saez got caught in a tough spot, no fault of his own. It looks like the horse in yellow came over a little on him in that spot, and actually, I think that was the eventual runner-up in here that kind of put him in tight.
Yeah, but the 3 horse is the one that kind of caused it, kind of forced the horse over that wound up running second. So, you know, listen, especially on the turf here, the races can be roughly run because you need to get that position into the turn. Kind of what we saw some passive riding earlier that we were critical of. That's what's going to happen sometimes when they jam up into the turn here.
No, this was a very competitively run race, and I think it begs the question of what is trouble worth? What about dynamics? Because the 12 ran very well, chasing the fast pace that collapsed wide the whole way. The 8 was chasing it and probably moved a little soon. The 12 ran better than the 8, though, in my opinion. He actually finished right behind her, but all things considered, ran very well. But the 1 had the trouble, but also dropped out of a race that collapsed. So, and I don't have an absolute answer because this is the kind of stuff, you know, we talk about speed figures and how fast they were going and everything like that. But this is the stuff you can't numerically answer. But ultimately, this is the kind of stuff that makes you money because if you're right in how you judge it, you're going to get paid for it because you cannot quantify it.
Well, you know, it's just interesting. Looking at Luis Saez's horse here, Bold Senator, he's 6-1. Is he going to be that price next time? Because if he is, you have to think he's worth a long look.
Well, and the other thing is I think people tend to overrate trouble. So they'll see the trouble, and they'll say he was the one who should have won the race. Now, obviously, if he gets a clean trip, he does win the race. There's no question about it. But if he won the race with a clean trip, Even won by a couple lengths, and he finished a little farther ahead of the 2 horses. We might be saying that they're the ones that ran the better race, so maybe that's the answer you have to look for. A very interesting way to look at the races, and we don't have the answers. We just try to figure it out like everybody else. We want to show one more race, and we want to show our Stars Above Me that just got a brutal trip in here, but also want to show you just how cool the winner, Free as a Bird, is. This is an amazing athlete.
She really is. I mean, and you know, again, these turf sprints, they get bunched up.
It's the 8. The 9 here, sorry.
The 9, yeah. The 9, and then...
behind her is Free as a Bird, the eventual winner.
And the 9 is very rank here, Stars Above Me. She's pulling, look at her head. She's fighting Irad Ortiz. She doesn't want to settle. I don't know that maybe he wouldn't have been better off just dropping her head a little bit and letting her kind of hold her position inside the horse with the yellow sleeves.
Tough horse to ride.
Very tough horse to ride, though. She's very rank, very keen. And
she shuffles the winner back.
Yeah, well, exactly. The winner kind of gets caught up behind her. And as well as she handled things the first time in the States was as poorly as she handled things the second time in the States.
Yeah, that's true, in a very frustrating situation. But she clearly has some talent, and she's obviously much better in her finish here. She's right here. The eventual winner is behind her. The athleticism, though, of Free as a Bird, because we're going to show you the head on the stretch, and you can watch in the pan. She gets in trouble numerous times, goes through a hole like a pin, you know, goes to the eye of the needle. The 8 and 9 is just getting completely taken out of the race. Stars Above Me. I mean, it's going to have to wait for another day. But Free as a Bird might have had to wait for another day, but she's too nimble.
She's nimble, and some daring do by Joel Rosario. And then to have the ability then to angle out abruptly around the stopping pace setter and still accelerate. This was really a marvelous performance, and this is really going to illustrate.
She's inside the 9 who's causing trouble. This is amazing.
And Joel actually did a really sharp thing here because he held that position when Irad starts to get shut off. He wants to go back in, but Joel's got the spot. Now he had to angle through this tight gap, and believe me, when you got a horse moving just outside of you and you're on top of the hedge like that, and then to abruptly come out, this was a sensational performance.
And he actually takes a hold of her before the wire. She ran for about 50 yards. I really don't know that she ran for a 16th of a mile in this race, and yet she still was able to win. It's remarkable.
Yeah, remarkable performance. And this is what you need to win these turf sprints consistently, is a horse that has gears, that is nimble enough to make those moves, and then be bold enough to go through spots like that.
And she's a horse that can go 7 furlongs. She doesn't have to be going 5.5. And you were saying how they want to go maybe the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. And maybe she's not good enough, but, man, there isn't a big gap between her, if she's not good enough, and the better turf sprinters, whoever they are.
I think I would love to ride her 6.5 down the hill because you need an athlete. You need a nimble horse, and she's all of that.
She's amazing. Anyway, we can always use your help. We'll be going back to Belmont soon. Trips and traps at NYRANK.com.